So, it's been a while since my last book review video, as in 3 months ago, a while. Since then, I've come up with new fun video ideas for the channel, came up with a general posting schedule, and cleaned my living space. It feels good to make so much progress in such a short amount of time, but also very tiring. But you didn't click on this video to hear about my personal life. You did it because you wanted to listen to me talk about this book I just read. And oh boy, do I have things to say about it. Doglands was a book published back in 2011 by Tim Willocks, a physician and novelist who has 6 other pieces of original published work, one of which was adapted to screen. He was born in 1957, making him 66 at the moment, and 54 at the time of writing Doglands, which he says he wrote in only 42 days. I wish I could write that fast. It would make scripting a lot easier. Despite the seemingly quick job, the book was given pretty good reception. It won the 2012 Montreal Book Festival Prize for European Young Adult Fiction, which I've never heard of, but it seems legit. It's also rated a 4 out of 5 on both Goodreads and Barnes & Noble. I tend to take those ratings with a grain of salt, though. Initially, I didn't think I would have any strong feelings about it. The book itself revolves around dogs, and considering all the dog xenofiction I've already read, I couldn't imagine myself being anything but bored. There's just so much of it already compared to other species that it already feels overdone. I mean, don't get me wrong, the species focused on isn't the only thing setting one story apart from another, but it sure does add some individualistic flavor. At least this book is about a greyhound instead of the usual Goldie or Shepherd. Those are a dime a dozen for sure. The plot, which is about a greyhound mix escaping death by his owner's hand and running away, is at least a new one. As for my personal spoiler-free thoughts on the book, well, the more I read, the more I disliked it. 2 out of 10. It was terrible. Can you believe it? The book written in 40 days wasn't very good. To be completely honest, I didn't even finish the book. I only made it to chapter 10 before giving up. If you want to pick up a quality book about dogs, look elsewhere. Or at the very least, don't spend money on this one. This book doesn't deserve to not be spoilered, so I'm moving into the spoiler section right away. If you really want to read this book and don't want to be spoilered on it, click off the video now. Chapter 1 of Doglands starts with a very weird opening of Once Upon a Time, which should have been a red flag, but I tried to assume the best of things. Sure, it was a weird choice, but there's a chance that it would be revealed to be a character telling a story to another, or even just a temporary narration style. As I would soon find out, this narration style was not temporary. Like I just said, if it had been used for a short prologue, it would have been completely fine, but this kind of narration does not work for novels because it's very tell not show. You use this style for 50-word picture books, not 1,000-word novels. This book suffers a crippling lack of natural description, which is always a bummer when it comes to xenofiction, because so much of the appeal is seeing the world through another creature's eyes. I've never read something so boring in this aspect, although the hunt for elsewhere was quite dry too. I might as well be reading from a human's perspective instead of a dog, because things are talked about the same way humans would talk about them. The dog characters seem to know everything a human would know about the human world. So, there's no mystery as to what's happening sometimes, even if it definitely doesn't make sense. For example, all the dogs seem to know about euthanasia and how it's performed, despite none of them ever actually witnessing it or being able to understand humans enough to know what happened to any dog that disappeared. This happens for a lot of other things, but euthanasia is brought up the most, so it caught my eye especially. I had a lot of trouble gauging what audience this book was for. When doing background research on it, I saw its festival prize and assumed it was for young adults, or like teens and up. Then I read the first few chapters and thought that it must be for preteens and younger due to the general lack of complexity and mature themes. But then, when I got further into it, there was a lot of sexualization of the main character and his genitalia. So there's no way it was for younger audiences, right? So I checked, and according to Amazon, it's for 7th to 12th graders, which would be 12-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds. It's a weird age range, but I suppose this book needed to capitalize on all the humans are evil edginess that comes from teenagers. And the weird sexual stuff kinda makes sense, because younger teens love that stuff for the sake of it. But it doesn't explain the whole once upon a time thing. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but that's not really a great way to start a book for preteens who are going to be starting to try and branch out into more mature media. I honestly don't think that Ted had a concrete audience, or really concrete anything, in mind when he started writing, and probably just went with whatever his publisher said. A huge portion of a book's enjoyability is usually owed to its characters. You, as the reader, are endeared to them by use of sympathy, relatability, and any traits that make them fun to read about. A good fiction book needs enjoyable characters in order to be good. That's why in today's xenofiction circles, the most popular books are Watership Down, Warrior Cats, and Wings of Fire. Doglands is not a good book, so it probably won't surprise you when I say that its cast is less than impressive. The main character, Fergal, is a half-greyhound, half-wolfhound who shares a major problem with the character Saxon from The Hunt from Elsewhere. He's what many would describe as a Mary or Gary Sue. When Fergal is introduced, there's a lot of emphasis on how strong and smart he is as just a puppy. There's a lot of talk about him protecting his siblings, which on the surface area is fine. You're allowed to have a character who loves his siblings. What I don't like though is the fact that all of his siblings, 3 female puppies, don't get any characterization at all next to this. If done right, Fergal's protective nature could have been an interesting plot point, but it was hard for me to care when I didn't know who he was protecting. It became obvious that his sisters weren't their own characters with thoughts and feelings, but simply a very cheap plot device put in to make us like the main character. When I realized this, I stopped caring about the sisters pretty immediately, which is fine because all 3 of them disappeared by chapter 3, with 2 dying and 1 running away. Their deaths could have been a powerful character moment for Fergal, had they been given personalities, but they were nobodies, so I didn't care. After their deaths, Fergal spends almost no time mourning either of them. After seeing the corpse of his first sister, all it says is, and I quote, "Fergal was so sad he felt like he would die too." And then it's back to business as usual. The book tries to justify the lackluster send-off later by saying that Fergal was young, and so he wouldn't have any real concept of death. But this doesn't really make sense with how much death is frankly talked about before his sister's death. It's a lame excuse that doesn't work at all, but could. And the fact that it could have worked if the author had just revised this thing a little sucks. It would have taken less than a few hours to edit the death scenes to make Fergal confused or in denial, only to add a scene of acceptance later on when he sees his dad die. But apparently this book isn't worth the time to edit it. Fergal, outside of puppyhood, kinda comes off as an asshole nepotism baby who's good at everything for no real reason. When he becomes a house pet, he bullies the bulldog that lives there before him. He's pretty obnoxious about how he knows more than the humans who own him, and he earns leadership among other dogs solely because of who his father was. Listening to him whine constantly got grating really fast. The rest of the dogs introduced are either one note or not giving any time to shine. Fergal's mom is introduced very early on, but stays one note as the mom character, with no real wants or needs outside of her son. There's a love interest introduced briefly. The book makes a huge effort to tell you that she's not like other girls, because she likes to play rough. But apparently she is, because she's taken a backseat for this much more boring main male character. There's a service dog that works for a blind man, which is actually something I've never seen in xenofiction before. But Ted clearly didn't do the bare minimum of research on seeing eye dogs, which sucks and further ruins immersion. There's a bunch of smaller dogs in the cast that seem only to exist to kiss Fergal's ass and tell the reader that Ted seems to hate small dogs for some reason. That's not really a joke either. I can't remember a single small dog who was taken seriously in the whole 10 chapters I got through. They were either characterized as annoying or cowardly. There's the bulldog that Fergal's an asshole to, who acts as a foil to Fergal's wild nature. He's kind of just a boring guy who adds to the already huge problem of the dogs knowing too much about human things. For some reason, Ted thought that it was necessary that he talk about the details of a specific dog food brand, mostly so that he could fit in another humans bad, nature good lesson. The main character gets all mad because they think that the food has, and I quote, beaks and buttholes, and I don't think that Ted has ever met a dog because they would love to eat that shit. Anyways, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting sidetracked, but the whole dog food thing comes up a lot, and it's really annoying hearing a guy complain about proper nutrition when they probably couldn't tell you what a carbohydrate is. The character of Fergal's dad, a wolfhound named Argle, is honestly the worst of the bunch. Not because they're necessarily terrible or anything, but because I can see what the author was going for and how far they missed the mark. When Argle is introduced, he's a mythical figure for Fergal to live up to, one who his mother doesn't know very much about. When father and son finally meet, it's in the back of a dog catcher's truck on the way to the pound. And the time that's actually spent with the character, we don't actually see him do anything that seems to warrant the admiration he gets. I mean, from intro to outro, the reader is constantly being told about all the cool things that Argle did, and how he's so cool that he's free, and how he can never be beaten or whatever. But now we actually see him, and all he does is get caught by dog catchers, get his ass kissed, pretend to give about his son, and die. I mean, talk about tell, don't show. Do you really expect me to believe that Mr. Absent Father did any of the stuff you said he did if this is all I see him doing? Not to mention that the way the shelter workers treat him just makes everything about the book feel faker. Like, yeah, Mr. Ted Williams, I'm sure that everyone clapped at the end, and that whole thing definitely happened. And I'm sorry to the author, but you will not and cannot convince me that these overworked shelter volunteers acknowledge Argle as anything other than an especially problematic dog. You can't. Antagonist-wise, the book is somehow even more lacking. There's an evil greyhound racer who only cares about money and does things super inefficiently as an excuse to show off how evil he is, like letting his dogs sit in their own urine for hours after saying that he doesn't like vet bills, because that's not an easy way to give your racing hounds respiratory problems. There's 2 guard dogs who don't really play in any important role in the first 10 chapters and could have just been one character. Then there's most humans that show up who want to control the dogs in some way. This book has a pretty big anti-castration, anti-euthanasia, and anti-animal control message that was clearly written by someone who doesn't understand why certain standards exist and thinks he knows more than trained professionals on the subject. Overpopulation is framed as this problem that happens because of just certain people breeding dogs, when it definitely isn't. Euthanasia is framed as this unjust, unlawful murder, when it's usually the better option a dog has than starving on the street or living in a cage its whole life because it's unfit to be rehomed. There's a ex-veterinarian in the book that says this after the euthanasia of Virgil's dad. It took 4 lethal injections to kill him, and even though they caused him terrible pain, he didn't make a sound. The vet said that Argyle was the strongest dog he'd ever seen. I'm sorry, what terrible pain? If Ted did the bare minimum of research, he would know that euthanasia doesn't hurt. The drugs that stop organ function cause unconsciousness. So, unless Argyle finds needles terribly painful, he wouldn't have felt much of anything. Don't even get me started about how many people have to put their pets down to save them from prolonged suffering. You know what? I need to calm down. That's enough for today. Overall, Doglands was a rushed hunk of garbage with a shitty message by someone who knows nothing about dogs but thinks he does, that doesn't deserve any positive attention when there are so many other books about dogs that surpass its quality. It's an okay hate read, I guess. I'll be honest, I had quite a bit more to say about this book that was scrapped for time, but I'll be lurking in the comments, so feel free to also suggest any books you'd like me to review next. I might already have a list, but I'm always adding more to it. I'll see you guys sometimes next month with my part 2 of my Wings of Fire video.